Hello, everyone, and welcome to Literary Tales. I'm your host, Paul Krause, and in this episode, we explore the construction of the great pastoral ideal, Arcadia, in Latin literature, from Virgil and Horace to Saint Augustine. Virgil is one of the most common names in Western literature. Apart from the Bible and Homer, his writings are among the most read in the history of the West. One cannot read any of the classical creative works of literature, or even works of literary criticism, up through the mid-20th century, and not find references to Virgil or his voice echoing through the pages. Virgil's relationship to the political has oscillated between subversive critic of the Augustine regime to sycophantic admirer, whose magisterial Aeneid was considered the culmination of the pagan political project. While the Aeneid is a fixture in the canon of Western literature, another of Virgil's work has all but been forgotten, the Eclogues. Yet Virgil's Eclogues rival the Aeneid. If the Aeneid was the culmination of the pagan political project and the triumph of civilization through the advancement of history and naked violence, then the Eclogues was the culmination of the pagan desire for serenity in a world often plagued by chaos, violence, death, and destruction. The environment and the world that the Aeneid is saturated in, the world that Rome had experienced throughout her entire history, especially in the years leading up to Virgil's life. This leads us to the question that has concerned scholars for the last century. Was Virgil a subversive critic of Augustus and the Roman Empire, a sort of proto-romantic reactionary yearning for the republican ideal? Or was he an outright propagandist for Augustus and the new regime that stamped order out of the chaos of nearly a century of war and fratricidal conflict? I think Virgil was a bit of both. Like the other great Latin poets, Horace especially, who we will look at in the course of this lecture, the praise sung to Augustus was not to Augustus per se, as the advocates of the subversive Virgil regularly highlight, quite correctly in my opinion, but for the Arcadian ideal Augustus allowed to flourish by ending the destructive chaos of war during his rule. That is to say, that the praise sung to Augustus, which we find in Virgil and the other Roman Latin poets, is not necessarily directed to Augustus as Augustus, but to what Augustus Caesar and his order gave birth to, the Arcadian ideal, the restoration of peace and serenity in the pastoral ideal. The Arcadian ideal is perhaps one of the most defining romantic images of the Roman Republic. We know the story of Cincinnatus, working his little plot of land only to be called back to service to save Rome in her hour of crisis, and his return to that little sliver of serenity once his dutiful performance to country had been concluded. Even Ridley Scott's Gladiator, that great film, portrays the Arcadian ideal when Russell Crowe's General Maximus dies and is reunited with his family in that naturalistic heaven at the close of the film, with the tranquility of Now We Are Free, that great song, providing a greater élan vital to the ideal aesthetic and experience. It is perhaps inaccurate to call Virgil a Neoplatonist. He certainly didn't have familiarity with the emergent Middle Platonism of the time. But Virgil's own life would have coincided with what was the origins and the beginnings of Middle Platonism, whose greatest representative, Plutarch, was born not long after Virgil's death. But what Virgil had in common with these future Middle and Neoplatonists was a desire to dwell in the divine realm of nature, the pastoral, the Arcadian ideal. The Neoplatonist heart, contrary to popular misconception, did not seek world flight, but a world dwelling in the deep roots of the transcendent soul implanted in nature. The largely ignored Eclogues clearly reveal this impulsive desire in the heart of Virgil's thought, the impulsive desire that influenced so much of Anglo-American literature and poetry, the pastoralism of English poetry, and the writings of many of the great classics of 19th century American literature. The greatest achievement of the Augustine writers was the creation of what we might call traditionalism. It is often said that history is written by the victors. Only someone ignorant of Latin literature could have conjured up such a fantastical belief. The greatest Latin writer of all, Cicero, was one of the losers of the Civil War. Lucan, another great Latin poet, was undeniably sympathetic to the anti-imperial and pro-republican cause. So too, I would contend, were Virgil, Horace, and Silius Italicus. Actual losers, and those sympathetic to the losers, wrote the great histories and poems that have survived, from Rome's great epoge down to modernity, and still inspire generations moved by their aesthetic prose, their yearning for peace, and unadulterated celebration of the hedonistic life afforded in Arcadia. We mustn't forget that the great Roman poet Horace was actually an officer in the armies of Brutus and Cassius. Virgil began composing the poems that comprise the Eclogues during the turbulence of the collapse of the Roman Republic and the Caesarian civil wars. The poems often oscillate between a pastoral and erotic desire for an ideal, with the looming clouds of chaotic urban civilization, the city of Rome, off in the background. And thus, you have many of the great moments in which the characters, real and mythic, that Virgil gives us in his poetry, discussing the pastoral ideal, the city that is called Rome, looming as a dark spot, a storm in the background, ready to destroy the Arcadian ideal with the chaos of urban civilization and the threat of war. Virgil's poetry is not really singing great praises to Rome, the eternal city, but it is singing praise to a different aspect of Rome as the Republic, the pastoral ideal. It is perhaps paradoxical to think that the great conflagration that was the decline and fall of the Roman Republic also produced the great vitality and creativity of Virgil, Horace, Ovid, Cicero, and other luminaries of Latin literature and history. In fact, the greatest writings of Latin literature come in the nadir of the Republic, the fall of the Republic, and its backsliding into empire. It is in the backdrop of war, chaos, death, and destruction that the greatest works of Latin literature, poetry, and history were produced. Yet, it is also not hard to understand why this is the case. In the turbulence and turmoil, the educated elite in Roman society yearned for a restoration and a return to their agrarian ideals, which had been shattered by mass marches, revolts, decades of war, the mobilization of great armies that would clash in the countryside and bring it all to ruin. Only as their world was fading away did they come to realize, with such passionate intensity often reflected in their poetry, how much they loved the world that was dying. After all, the pleasant friendship enjoyed and the peaceable conversation that Virgil gives us in his first eclogue is something far removed from tales of flight, fight, and storms. Happy old man, here amid familiar streams and sacred springs, you shall enjoy the cooling shade. On this side, as of old, on your neighbor's border, the hedge whose willow blossoms are sipped by Hybla's bees, shall often with its gentle hum soothe you to slumber. On that, under the towering rock, the woodman's song shall fill the air, while still the cooing wood pigeons your pets, and the turtle dove shall cease not their moaning from the elm tops. The image that Virgil describes here is quintessentially serene, where in sacred springs, enjoying the shade, the pleasant serenity of the neighbor's hedge, the blossoming of the flowers, the bees collecting the honey from those blossoming flowers, the woodman's song and the songs of the birds, bringing one rest, peace, and slumber. The ultimate end of this pastoral ideal is a humanization of the wedding banquet of Peleus and Thetis, minus all the strife. Yet this night you might have rested here with me on the green leafage. We have ripe apples, mealy chestnuts, and a wealth of pressed cheeses. Rome has won this peace and bountiful harvest for men to enjoy. For that reason, Rome is a god. But the god that is Rome is also kept at that far distance. We see Virgil's many characters he includes in the Eclogues not praying to the god of Rome. Instead, they pray to the muses, the stags, the starlight that intimately surround them, that they dwell in. That is what governs and guides the heart of Virgil's poetry. He acknowledges what provides this idyllic serenity, Rome and Augustus, but he doesn't worship them as he does the Arcadian paradise that he calls home, the Arcadian paradise that calls all of us home, that yearning serenity, the peaceful ideal, and how so many of us, even living now in the 21st century, still have that romantic image of buying a ranch out in nature, out in the pastoral fields, with the rolling countryside, animals surrounding us, the sun rising, peace, prosperity, safety, serenity. Virgil, like his Greek forebears, was also something of an ironist. Aeneas is driven away from his ancestral homes and into the tumult of the sea by capricious gods, who also deny his desire to wed Dido and live a comfortable and pleasurable life on the shores of Carthage. Aeneas, traveling to the underworld, hears the prophecies of the coming of Rome and the son of Jupiter, Augustus, ruling over the entire world. The Aeneid is a poem of strife and war. It is also a poem celebrating the new ideology of the Augustan Empire, traditionalism in the form of pietas. Pietas in Latin means duty. English derives the word piety from it. But while we envision gentle grandmothers praying rosaries, the Roman understanding of piety, pietas, was imbued with the spirit of masculine struggle and duty. Duty to honor the gods, duty to protect your family, the duty to serve your fellow countrymen. But such a life of constant struggle, as Virgil implies throughout his poetry, is not actually worth living. We want the pastoral ideal and the peace that it offers. We seek the serenity offered within the closed walls of the garden within a cosmos of strife and conflict. We desire the sumptuous. None of this is possible through the constant, laborious struggles of pietas. Augustus will bring peace, yes, this is to be sure, and this is undoubtedly a good thing. But what is better than Augustus's mere Pax Romana is the Pax Arcadia, the peace of the pastoral beauty and serenity of the garden, that garden of beauty, joy, and that garden that satiates all of the soul's desires. The luscious canopy of spreading beech, wooing the woodland muse on slender reed, is what Virgil really sings praise of. As such, Augustus is actually just a mere instrument, a means to an even greater end. Augustus, ironically, gets passed by as we approach the Arcadian paradise that calls Virgil and all of our souls home. When Aeneas travels into the underworld in the 6th book of the Aeneid, the usual descent beyond the realm of the living to experience the transcendent mysteries of esoteric knowledge, it is not so much the prophecy of Augustus that this descent reveals to us, but the vision of Elysian fields, Arcadia. That is the true culmination of the revelatory sojourn in the 6th book of the Aeneid. Meanwhile, in a quiet valley, Aeneas sees a secluded grove and roaring forest thickets, and the river of Lethe rippling past many peaceful homes. In the valley danced innumerable people and tribes out in the meadows, with the blue skies of summer shining overhead. Bees land and feast on many-hued blossoms and stream round luscious flowers and lilies, and all the green pastures murmur with the life and the buzzing and humming of the bees and animals. Dancing humans, joyfully singing, green forests and rushing waters, and the humming and buzzing of bees and all other animals are all seamlessly interwoven together here in an unforgettable image of beauty and harmony. The many peaceful homes in a poem of war, in the descent to the underworld. In this moment of the poem, Virgil gives us the glittering image of the true pastoral ideal. This image of joyous peace with man and nature as one, is the true revelation for Aeneas, not the prophecy of Augustus. This image of Arcadia, is what Aeneas is destined to bring for his descendants and the souls of Rome and the world. Arcadia, these Elysian fields, is what Aeneas is truly fighting for and struggling for. This image, provided by Virgil in the Aeneid, also helps us understand some of the praise and the proto-romantic poetry of that other great Latin poet, Horace. Horace, as we know, was an outright, thoroughgoing hedonist. In his biography of Horace, Suetonius writes, Horace is said to have been exceptionally intemperate in his love affairs, and there is a story that he so disposed his lovers in a mirrored room that whichever way he looked, there was a reflection of sexual intercourse. It is unsurprising that Horace's poetry often blurs the line between sex, love, and lust. But reading Horace also reveals his distaste and his disdain for fratricidal civil wars and urban progress, which destroys the very agrarian ideal, which makes the hedonistic life possible. The contempt that Horace has for civil war, being a man who lived from 65 BC to 8 BC, and lived, therefore, through the constant tumult and turmoil for much of his life, until the aftermath of the Battle of Actium, the constant conflict and chaos of the Roman Civil War, is therefore easy to understand. Horace's entire life was filled with conflict and violence, and his desire for that Arcadian ideal of peace is what his poetry is really about. He condemns civil strife, and he looks forward to the return of the pastoral image of ideal human relationship with other humans under the bountiful sumptuousness of nature. The horror of war constantly grieves Horace, as he writes in one of his poems, "Back to war, Venus, after all these years? Spare me, I beg of you." War, as we've mentioned, has literally ruined much of Horace's life, destroyed the pastoral ideal, and has made the pleasurable life impossible. As he goes on to say, "As for me, I no longer take pleasure in a woman or a boy, nor in the fond hope that my love might still be returned, nor in drinking bouts, not in binding my brow with fresh flowers." Horace goes further in describing war as something mad. The madness of war is incomprehensible to him. Men like Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, and Crassus, who thrived on war and sought war to win the praises and acceptance of the Republican establishment, utterly horrified him. The madness of war is naturally contrasted then in Horace's poetry with the romanticized Arcadian ideal that was re-emerging under Augustus, but still threatened by the urbanization of Rome and the broader Italian peninsula, which threatened to engulf what was left of the Arcadian ideal. "But when the thunder of Jove's winter season musters the rain and snows, with all his dogs on every side he drives wild boar into his ring of nets, or stretches wide mesh toils on twigs, he's smooth to trap the greedy thrushes, and hunts the timid hare and crane migrating to his snare, delicious prey. Amid these pleasures, who would not forget the miseries brought on by love?" What a wonderful description of the Arcadian ideal, now that the civil wars are over. When Horace praises Augustus, like Virgil, the emperor is merely an instrument to be passed by, a shield of peace, to be sure, but not the real focus of the poet's adoration. "I was eager to sing of battles and defeated cities," Horace says, "but Phoebus struck his lyre and forbade me to sail my little boat across the Tyrrhenian Sea. Your Augustan age, Caesar, has given rich crops back to our fields, has brought the standards back to our Jupiter, tearing them from the proud doors post of the Parthians. While Caesar is guardian of the state, neither civil war nor civil madness will drive away our peace, nor will anger beat out its swords and set city against unhappy city." But even though this appears to be a celebration of Augustus, if you read the poem closely, if you read what is actually being praised, it is the rich crops and the beautiful, bountiful fields of peace that is being praised. Augustus's victory, the victories of the Roman Empire in ending civil strife and civil madness, that's not what Horace is praising. He's not really praising Augustus. He is praising the Arcadian ideal that has reemerged because of Augustus. Augustus, again, is simply someone to acknowledge and then pass over. The true heart and the true soul of the praise of Horace's poetry is the beautiful, bountiful, and sumptuous, serene land of nature that has been given back to him. The end of war is a good thing, and insofar that Augustus has brought about the end of civil madness that drives peace away, Horace has only good things to say, but we must never forget that Horace fought against Augustus at the Battle of Philippi. Horace he threw his lot in with the Republican cause, and even though they lost, in some ways the Republican cause won, because the peace forged by Augustus Caesar brought about the return of what Horace is really singing praises of, Arcadia. This desire for the Arcadian ideal is inherited even by Christianity. Saint Augustine of Hippo was, at one level, the harshest critic of the emptiness and the lies of the Roman ideology in the ancient world. In the City of God, Augustine exhaustively critiqued the propagandist ideology of Roman exceptionalism, Romanitas, laying bare the lies of Rome for all to see. Despite Augustine's critical indictment against Rome's lust to dominate the world and bringing untold misery to millions in its wake, the slaughtering of entire peoples, and the enslavement of many others, Augustine, just like Virgil, just like Horace, stopped short of condemning political order altogether. Some degree of political order is good. But why is it good? It's not good in of itself. It is good for what it provides to the world. Something grander than politics as politics. In Book 19 of the City of God, Augustine gives what stood as the most consequential political theology in Christian history, at least until the Second Vatican Council. There is a temporal good that is universal to pagan and Christian alike, which politics provide. It is altogether not dissimilar from the praise of peace found in Virgil and Horace. Peace, Augustine argues, is the great good that benefits all and that all aim for. Anyone who joins me, he writes, in an examination, however slight, of human affairs and of human nature that we all share, recognizes that just as there is no man who does not wish for joy, so there is no man who does not wish for peace. Insofar that political order, cruel and fraudulent as it often is, nevertheless provides some degree of peace, from that peace emerges the possibility for happiness, joy, and love. It is the heavenly city, in her pilgrimage here on earth, that makes use of the earthly peace and defends and seeks compromise between human wills in respect of the provisions relevant to the mortal nature of man, so far as may be permitted, without detriment to true religion and piety. In fact, that city relates to the earthly peace, to the heavenly peace, which is so truly peaceful that it should be regarded as the only peace deserving the name, at least in respect of the rational creation. For this peace, Augustine continues, is the perfectly ordered and completely harmonious fellowship in the enjoyment of God and of each other in God, in God's creation. The Church as peacemaker, blessed be the peacemakers, is also for an even greater end, the true Arcadian ideal and paradise, that is the beatific vision found in God. As the Vandals were sweeping through North Africa, Augustine upbraided Count Boniface, the Roman general and master of the soldiers in Africa, for his dereliction of duty. Augustine and Boniface were friends. Boniface, in fact, had sought to retire from the army and join a monastery, but Augustine talked him out of it. so that he may provide the peace that so many of his fellow citizens benefited from. As Boniface dithered and refused to face the Vandals, Augustine excoriated him for lack of Christian charity in upholding his vows to Rome to provide the peace and security of North Africa. Augustine, the great critic of Rome and the emptiness of the politics of Rome in the first half of the City of God, is not contradicting himself later in the second half of the City of God or in his letters to Boniface. Augustine does not see the temporal peace wrought by the force of Rome as something awful. The temporal peace of Rome does provide a serenity that all humans desired. But Augustine goes even beyond just that. Imperfect as Rome was, and imperfect as Rome was to Virgil and Horace, it nevertheless provided a sense and space and temporal order for that soul's journey to Arcadia, the true Arcadia to Augustine, the new Eden, where the only peace deserving the name existed, and the true joy that all humans seek is actualized. Augustine's praise of the peace won in temporal politics, just as it is in Virgil and Horace, is a praise that aims and goes beyond the political. It goes beyond Rome. The reason why peace is good is because it allows us to sojourn and journey to Arcadia, to find that true peace and joy that all humans seek. This is what political order allows for us. Politics is important not because politics is going to bring our salvation. Politics is important because, if we use modern parlance, it allows us to have a life of liberty and the pursuit of happiness. But that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness leads us to the discovery of a garden. Augustine shares with Horace and Virgil the desire for a nature of bountiful peace, joy, and serenity. Horace gives us the greatest image and the greatest writing of this heart, shared by Virgil and the other great Latin Roman poets, shared by Augustine and the many great Christian Latin writers who inherited this tradition and who conceptualized heaven in the same terminology and imagery as their Roman forebears. So let us seek the blessed fields and wealthy isles, where every year the land unplowed gives grain, and the vines unpruned are never out of flower, and olive shoots unfailing bud, and set their fruit, and dusky fig, ungrafted graces in its own tree. The honey flows from the hollow ilex, and from hills the streamlet lightly leaps with sounding footfall. There to the milking pails unbidden come the goats, and friendly flocks their swollen udders bring. When evening comes, no howling bear patrols the pens, no viper heaves its mound of earth. Enchanted, we shall wonder at it all. It is now unmistakable what really governs the heart of Latin literature. From the pagan poets to the Christian artists, whom we call theologians, the green pastures with all their ripening fruit and flowers, bestowing peace and happiness to mankind. That is what governs the Latin soul of literature. In that garden, as Augustine says, how great shall that happiness be which shall be tainted with no evil, which shall lack no good, and which shall afford leisure for the praises of God, who shall be all in all. In that garden, Arcadia, the new Eden, the chaos of the cosmos finds its calm. In that garden, the restless heart of man finds its final and perfect rest. And with this knowledge, we begin to understand the power and the majesty of so much of Anglo-American poetry, the pastoral poetry of English literature, the Arcadian ideal reimagined in American mythology and culture, the American West calling us home to a new life, a new beginning. What the politics of Latin literature confers to us is the desire for peace and joy, a peace and joy found in an intimate environment of beauty which the poets, even the Christian theologians, describe as a garden. The politics of Latin literature is superseded by that ideal image of a garden of peace, beauty, and prosperity. Latin literature does not praise the generals or emperors or consuls as such. When they are praised, these offices and officers are merely sung as an instrument of passing, the people who brought peace that allowed the Arcadian ideal to become a reality, however fleeting that reality might be. The golden age of Latin literature, running through its nadir with the collapse of Rome, finds itself replete with the same symbolism, from the pagans to the Christians. Our world is often beset by chaos and strife, confusion and disorder, and civil unrest. But in the midst of it, there is the yearning and journeying to a peace and serenity that calls us all home and brings healing and wholeness to friendships, cities, and sinful human beings. The taste of that reality, which is always found in peace, sets us on a journey for that new horizon. But the greater wisdom, however terrifying, is that the race to Arcadia runs through strife, murder, and war. That fact makes the Arcadian ideal even more desirable. So, like that final great artist, so moved by Latin literature, Dante, we find ourselves on that same hallowed path our forebears tread. From those holiest waters I returned, to her reborn, a tree renewed, in bloom, with newborn foliage, immaculate, eager to rise, now ready for the stars. In that journey, we might just find, as Dante did, the echoes of Virgil by our side as we realize the love that guides the cosmos is intimately bound up with the reality of a garden with the luminescent stars of Latin writers, poets, theologians, philosophers, pagan and Christian alike, illuminating that garden that we are all journeying to.